Welcoming you all to another discussion of sense, nuance, and common sense. This is your host, Arul Bhatt. We have the pleasure of having Shri Pradeep Kol Khadbali with us, and the topic for discussion today is No Kings in Democracy. The backdrop for this discussion is the widespread protests and mobilization of general public that occurred in USA against the president, rather against the authoritarian manner in which Donald Trump is trying to wield his presidency, and the resonance of this idea that there are no kings in democracy in Europe, in England, and some other places, though very few other places. So we today begin this discussion on the topic No Kings in Democracy. So Pradeepji, you are welcome.
Thank you, Barsab. Thank you for your time and for your invitation. And I think you have rightly said that no kings in democracy. But first things first, here the discussion that there will be a series of discussions, God willing, in future. And in such discussions, it's very important to understand that we don't claim ourselves to be any experts in any field whatsoever. But every citizen, sensitive, thinking citizen of this country or of any part of the world has a right to express his opinion or her opinion. Because to every sensitive man, things that happen in the world, they definitely um, force and incite in him a response. And so it's very important that every well meaning, every sensitive citizen should express his or her opinion. There is a very important term that some people indulge in, ultra crepidarian. That is, that is for them to understand what's the ultra crepidarian. But here, every sensitive person should express his views because in a democracy, the first ferment of democracy is to express opinions.
You are
And
very
what we
right.
have seen,
Yes,
and
please go on.
what we have seen in last couple of days happening in America and Western Europe is that no kings in democracy is the tagline of the protests that are widespread protests. In America, 3,000 places have witnessed such protests. And millions of people from Idaho, from Virginia, from Florida, from every part of the country have taken part. People have taken part. They have come on the streets, on roads with placards saying that no kings in democracy. And same thing happened in Western Europe. It's very queer and very interesting that the cradle of democracy, the modern democracy, though we may boast that India has had a great democratic system in sixth century BC or couple of years more, couple of centuries earlier, but the modern democracy that we see is reflected in these protests
Yes,
because in other parts of the world, no such protests took place, no noticeable protests took place. So
you are very right.
what happened? Yeah, what happened in Western Europe and America.
You are very right. There is a saying, a very commonplace saying that sometimes they say in other subjects. The first time it was aired about economics, that economics is too important a subject to be left to economists. Now the same thing is
Yeah,
being said
exactly.
about history and other subjects. The point is that while the experts, the people who know, they have, of course, a greater in-depth study on the subject. But the point is that uh, uh, all these things, they concern the people at large. And unless the people at large are taken into consideration, unless they enter the dialogue, unless people at large enter the discussion, the objectives may not be properly achieved. Like, say, in
Yeah.
economics, even, unless we take into account the sentiments, the thinking, the behavior, the response, and the expectations of common people, probably no long time or proper policies will be framed. And democracy has always been styled by the people, for the people, of the people, by the people, for the people. So people are very important here. And that is something which we have seen in the Western Hemisphere, the North America, Europe, Western Europe, and England. It is very important that, as you have pointed out, that there were not many takers in other places. What does that tell
Yes.
us? It tells us that people in other places probably are not so very cognizant of what it means to be a Democrat.
Yes.
Here
Very, very
it is.
well.
Here it is very important to. I think not important, more than important. It is telling to know how the No Kings demonstrations started in USA.
Mm.
In this
Yes.
last year, 2025, that was when Donald Trump's inauguration had taken place in January, on 20th January, so 6th. So it was some 3 or 4 months after,
Mm.
5 months after Trump had been president. His birthday fell on 14th of June. And on that
Yeah.
day, he brought, rather commanded, because the president is also the commander of all the forces. He brought the military to perform for a parade on his birthday. And
Mhm.
some things had happened before that. Some arbitrary authoritarian actions had taken place previously, but then this birthday parade, army getting army to hold a parade on his birthday, it proved to be the last straw, as they say, on the camel's back, and
Mm.
people erupted. So the first
Yes.
No Kings demonstration was held on 14th June. The important point to note here is that the Americans rose against it. They understood, by the mere fact of army being brought in to perform, sort of, on the president's birthday, it showed them it is an act which happens only in dictatorships, in tyrannies, in kingly realms. And they rose up against it. And just some 7 months back, those very Americans, they had voted Donald J. Trump to power. So that
Yes.
understanding, that realization, that makes a democracy real democracy. And people
Yes.
there are
True.
very important.
Yes. And interesting part of this whole episode is that from MAGA, make America great again, to no kings. It's a, it's a tragedy. It is a travel, and that speaks of two different things. That first, people were swayed by Donald Trump in the first part, and then they realized that this man is going to be something different, and he is taking us all for a ride. And as you said rightly, that bringing paramilitary forces, American army and paramilitary forces to parade for his birthday, on his birthday, means that here he is not the president of America. That what even Ronald Reagan said. that it's not easy to be president of America. The president of America means that people have reposed some faith and powers temporarily with the president of America so that he can discharge his duties according to the law of the land. These are the words of President Ronald Reagan.
That is something very
But
important.
yeah, and
That is
what
yes, please
Ronald
carry
Reagan was Ronald Reagan was, and he was so he was a very flamboyant, and he was a man dedicated to arts, to movie theater. He was an actor also. But here we see that another man in another realm of business, saying, making everything deals and deals and deals. Perhaps he thought that American people is also a deal. And but the depth of roots of democracy in America are deep, more deeper than we thought.
Yes, definitely.
And that that's why people came up and they said to Trump, look, we don't believe in these kingships. We fought British in 1774 and threw them away because because we wanted to have a new world. And this is the hope for the future, perhaps. This is the thing that is very important.
You have
And
mentioned
democracy,
MAGA. You have mentioned MAGA.
yeah,
One of the
yeah.
banners which I saw in those protests was it was the banner. It was MAGA, MAGA, and
Mm,
it was spread out, written out. Morons are governing America.
rephrasing of the of America
That
from
is the
complete
point.
rephrasing.
Many people are under the false impression that simply having elections means democracy.
Mm,
The first thing is that we must have elections, and the elections should be free and fair. That is the basics of it. But
yes,
alongside the elections, it is the institutions which are
mm,
equally important. There, you have got
yes,
parliament, you have got people's representatives, you have got institutions like Supreme Court, you have got
mm,
other legislative institutions, and those institutions must function. When those institutions cease functioning, like say in this American case, let's take the case of Trump, he appears to somehow hold so much of influence over the Republican Party that the fact of Republicans wielding a majority in the parliament, both houses,
mm,
Congress and Senate,
mm, mm,
they are ready to give him a carte blanche. And
yeah,
that is not the democratic spirit. In
yes,
yesterday's demonstrations, people all over America, there were 3,300 places all over America
yeah,
where protests were held.
yes,
It is estimated that more than 8 million people participated in those
participated.
protests.
Mm,
And those people, there was one of the demonstrations I saw effigies of Trump along with all the other secretaries and
mm,
the
mm,
institutions I was talking of. There was the DOJ, there was the FBI director, they,
mm,
Pam Pandi and Kash Patel, they too
mm,
were included in those refugees and told that these people have to hold up. They are all to they were all to be discarded.
yes,
Democracy
yes,
works. Of course, the basis comes from elections, and free and fair, very free and very fair, without manipulation. We have got to be very important, mindful here, because Trump
yes,
is also trying to manipulate the voter lists there. He today has a bill called Save Bill in the Parliament, whereby he wants to impose identity cards this way, that way, the means of restricting people's access to elections, their ability to register for voting. That is one sort of nuance. And the second sort is there is the institution, Department of Justice, the FBI, and the Supreme Court.
Yes,
They
yes,
have to be independent. Ideally, though the prime minister in cabinet or president in case of America is said to be holding the supreme power, but they are generally called the first ones among equals, and that means
yes, yes,
in a cabinet meeting there has to be discussion. People may oppose the policies. It cannot be that a single person, maybe a prime minister or even a president, would unilaterally force decisions on the cabinet and then, because of the sway he or she holds, get the parliament to rubber stamp those decisions. That is not the spirit of democracy. And whenever that thing happens, it is the loss of democracy, and we, the people, have passed to tyranny. So
yes.
that is
And
what
there are
the
two.
Americans are protesting right now, because they see clear signs that this elected executive, is transiting into an authoritarian dictator.
Yeah. And here are two very interesting points. One point is that elections, meaning democracy, it doesn't hold much water. Then we have elections just 10 days ago. A very queer sham election was held in North Korea, where 99% of people were said to have voted for Kim Jong. 99% people. And only 1% couldn't vote for him because they were either sick or they were out or they were so poor they couldn't travel or that. Then we have Putin's elections also. That's another democracy. Then we have quite nearer to us in our neighborhood in Pakistan. It's also democracy. Elections are no sure shot that there is democracy unless democracy seeps into the grassroots level. And number two point is this, that how fortunate we were that the founding fathers of our constitution and our democracy, they scripted a parliamentary system of democracy for us, not a presidential form. Though there are some voices are being raised in some circles here in India that people who should have a presidential form of government or something else. But this parliamentary system has a long list of checks and balances. If these are kept intact, that makes them ideally ideal thing for a good democracy, a working democracy.
That is important. Democracy, you in a democracy, of course, the first thing is a voting process, and it should be free and fair. By no stretch of imagination can anything 70%, 80%, 99%, these percentages, they simply cannot happen. Trump won the election and it was 51% last election. Prior to that, Biden was elected and that was again 51.5%. So, but more important is that simply by calling yourself a democracy, putting in the word democracy in the constitution does not make you a democracy. You have
Yes,
cited, you have
exactly.
talked of Korea. We can have these all around us. You have Pakistan. We have got so many. Even China is people is republic. What is republic? Republic is also a presumably kingless
Yes,
state. Then there is of course China, this Russia, and then whole of African continent. As you did point out, that none of these places, nowhere in Asia, nowhere in Africa, nowhere even in the Southern America. There were no protests there, but
Okay.
there were protests in Europe.
Yeah.
What I sincerely hoped and should expect was that we should have had some protesters in India, because
Yes.
India does look to these democracies. India does not look to Pakistan. India does
No.
not look to Korea. India does
Mm.
not look to China. India does not look to Russia. It does not look to oligarchies in so many parts of Asia and Africa. India looks to pre-democratic societies where democracy operates, where there are institutions, where there is free and fair, unhindered, universal franchise. What's that? Everybody goes and everybody can vote. Anybody who is a citizen can vote. All citizens, and the duty, it is a duty of the election authority, that is another institution of the democracy, to make it possible to ensure
Yeah.
that nobody is left behind. Everybody has the opportunity to vote. That's why we have so many polling stations. That's why we are trying to reach out even the remotest parts. And
Yeah.
that is
Even,
democracy in
even,
operation. And
even
democracy
for
in
even for few
operation,
voters. Yeah.
when democracy operates, it is
Mm.
we people resonating to the spirit of democracy, not to the letter of democracy. That is very important.
Exactly.
I think if you have any closing comments, please go ahead.
So this is very important that these the no kings for us, these demonstrations, they must they must give us a thought for ourselves, and they must galvanize the democratic spirit within us, so that we become even more conscious of our rights, of our duties, and what we ought to do to make our country more democratic, more strong, because you become more stronger if is a conversation, if there is a dialogue among different people. When the dialogue is cut, when the dialogue is not there, and only an enforced opinion of few, then that is the casualty for democracy. That is not good for democracy.
That is the spirit. The democracy has got to be fostered. You have to live it. People have to imbibe it. People must be ready to support the principles of dialogue, conversation, as you are what you are talking of, and it should not be conformism, that somebody has said so and we must all go there.
Follow it.
That
Yeah.
is that is very important. There are people who do think that democracy is not a perfect system. Probably there could be better systems, but today, on this day of March, democracy is the most versatile system we have around
That
for
we
getting
have around.
public opinion, people's will, people's wishes into the system of governance. And that is
Yes.
where you and me talking, where common
Yes, that's
people
important.
speaking, where common sense
Yeah.
coming to fore becomes important. Thank
Yeah,
you very
that is
much
why
for
we
this
can call. Yeah.
conversation. Thank you, Pradeep.
Thanks, Varsha. Thanks, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all for watching.